we've been molded. Society has been directed. It's been pushed in a certain direction, and narratives have been written. Like I said, I showed you a Bertrand Russell quote from 1951, where they're already talking about global depopulation, whenever there wasn't even, a quarter of the people on the planet. We have things like the Georgia Guidestones that talk about a nice, cozy 500 million people would be nice, and the story behind how that got put up, and all these interesting data points, as you call them. So I think that, and then there's, like you brought up Randall Carlson, and then what happens is that society is allowed to run its course for a certain amount of time, and then it gets hit, whether randomly or on purpose, by comets that just completely knock it completely out, or asteroids come in and just slam and destroy the entire cycle, and we have to rebuild, and rapid evolution has to happen, and God knows what has happened on this planet for 4 billion years. I mean, there's obviously a lot of potential for there being advanced civilizations far in our past. And I think that if you keep going, you may even find that it goes off planet. I mean, we're finding Mars is a very interesting place to look, and we see evidence of potential civilizations there. So that brings up even larger questions. So yeah, I think there's two cycles. I think there's this natural cycle that Randall Carlson talks about. Hey, if we don't stop bitching and arguing and start looking and taking all of these millions of dollars, billions of dollars of military technology and start pointing it to the stars and saying, hey, we need to start tracking these asteroids and comets and figure out a way to keep these things from coming in, because there's cycles going on here. And if we don't advance far enough to protect ourselves, we're going to get hit. And so I think that's happening. And I don't know, I think we're at this breaking point. I think we're due for a cosmic cataclysm. And I think at the same time, humanity's actually shifting into a higher state of awareness where it has a chance to evolve into something that it would never recognize in its past 4,000 year history. So I think that's what makes it so interesting. And then of course we have the Mayan calendars, we have the Yuga cycles, we have these bronze, silver, golden age mythologies that come out of our collective histories and societies. And, like you said, everything starts to kind of thread together. You definitely see a big thing happening all over, ancient, modern, cosmic, planetary, wherever you look, there's a lot of things lining up. And I think that, like you said, the best thing we can do is just to go through the data, because you brought up will, which I think is interesting, because if the universe basically is awareness, and you could say that intelligence or consciousness is the foundational source of matter, and that it has created a will that has its own autonomy, that can then evolve within its own set of boundaries, however it expresses, then you would see that your evolution collectively is altered by will, and that will is only expressed through the knowledge and perception that it contains, right? So I'm going to change my direction in my focus and my intention based on knowledge that I get exposed to, or that I seek, and that changes who I am. And when that changes who I am, I then act differently, or I have different intentions. I change the way I feel about things. I change the way I want to do things. I have different reasons to do things. And that all comes down to knowledge creating a new drive for will, right? Because will is going to exist regardless, but it's knowledge that changes where that will is then directed. And I think that's interesting to us as biological creatures. Whenever we make the shift, are we going to be different on levels that we could never comprehend? I mean, what's happening?
Well, one of the things that, again, going back to my point about the cycles within cycles, is I think that, again, if we look at the data that we have of what is called or placed in the history knowledge stack, there's a bunch of consistencies that are cycles. They keep happening over and over and over again, and they are consistent with this what we see when we look outside of what we consider the human history, right? So if we look at the data that we have regarding geology and science, astronomy, and how it became astrology, because literally that was, you wouldn't have astrology without astronomy, right? Because you have these lights in the sky that move around and have been given patterns, and those patterns have been apparently, um, they've been documented for a long time, because some of the cycles you wouldn't know without 20, 30, 100,000 years of of measuring. Because that's the thing
Yeah.
that I've been trying to get through on, like the Great Rethink and the Metamind, is to change, not to change, I guess change eventually, but to get more systematic thinking about what it is that you think about and experience in your reality, because there is a system to it. And this goes to one of the other aspects we were talking about with how awesome Randall is, because what he does is integrates different knowledge disciplines and shows where their connections are. And one of the most profound that it seems to cut across everything is geometry and the language of math, or how we define. To me, math is nothing more than the symbology to express distinction, right? Whatever it is that
Right.
it's a way in which it's a symbolic language, really, of that which the way you measure things. And we all know that if you're trying to manage something, you better be measuring it, or you're not going to be able to manage it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and then there's harmony within that, right? Because like if you build a certain way, towards certain mathematics, it's more sound, right? It's more protective, or it works more. So there's this harmony within the structure, right? As they basically segment things into patterns and parts and numbers, then they realize, oh, there's this connection. Like if I have a certain length of something, then it's stronger, right? If my sword's a certain length or a shortened whatever, it changes the way that things can be used. And this is something that I think that brought that intelligence of the apparatus, right? Because you realize that these divine proportions and these embedded codes within nature is basically a language. It's like it's speaking to you. Hey, this is how things work. This is the way you should do these things. And also, this is how your life changes. And I think that's like you said, the astrology and astronomy became very connected through the mathematics, the measurements, and that I think was the first religion, right? That trio of information that got discovered, and that would be the beginnings, I think, of our I guess what you would call our self-aware, great self-awareness in the ancient past. And who knows how long ago that was, or or we've had it for millions of years. But that's the beginning, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because one of my favorite stories that Sheldrake shared is one of his, when he was hanging out with Terence McKenna, um, was the idea apparently in the current narrative, the when they look at the paleontology of the way in which the humans evolved over the last couple of 100,000 years. In fact, there's some interesting. One of the theories is, it wasn't, humans striding across the savannah, attacking and uh, just going after hunting and doing all that. It wasn't man that was the hunter; it was man that was the hunted. And the ways in which some of the communities and so forth um, seem to uh, what the average size was in the 100 to 200 range, and then they would move and so forth. But the interesting thing about McKenna was, in the science, they say that sometime around 50,000 years ago, there was this um, collection, this integration of different types of intelligence, historical intelligence, knowing how things happen, um, uh, technical intelligence, how to make tools and clothes and so forth, creative intelligence, the paintings in the various caves and so forth. There seemed to be this coagulation around 50,000 years ago of these different types of intelligences. Terence McKenna said that's about the time that they discovered psilocybin. And that is what caused
Yeah, right.
that over time, but it helped create a synergies of those different intelligences, because they found plant medicine. And you go,
Yeah. Well, that
I
it's
I
called the
can see
stoned
that.
ape theory.
Right.
It's stoned ape theory. But I mean, it's true, and I think there's some truth to that. And I think that there could be, a lot of things could have happened. That could be one way. And I want to talk about the aquatic ape theory after this for just a quick second. But on the McKenna end, I mean, you then go back to our original conversation. We're talking about programming. I mean, it obviously seems that these substances like DMT and or psilocybin, these compounds are made specifically to basically interface with our biocomputers, you want to call it. I mean, our mind, and that's not by accident in my belief. I don't think that catalyst could accidentally exist. I mean, I think this goes into the intelligent design conversation, because you don't just accidentally have like a particular chemical or compound that is non-toxic to the human mind, and the human mind knows exactly how to basically take it in. It's good for it. It's actually shown now, as we study it, that it's essentially an antidepressant, like more powerful than anything big pharma's ever created. And I'm sure that the shamans and everybody knew this, but it was a healthy thing to do. And not only was it healthy, but it wasn't toxic, and it also created an entire new level of awareness. So it definitely has a lot of merit. I mean, what are the chances of that happening accidentally in the just random Darwinian evolutionary model? I mean, that's not going to happen. So that's a good point. What is DMT? Our mind, it's the most powerful hallucinogenic on the planet. Our brains produce it naturally. It's one of the most non-lethal things for you to take chemically. Your brain knows exactly what to do with it. It basically it neutralizes it and uses it within 20, 30 minutes of you taking it. And what is that? Why? What's going on there? Seems like an intelligence to me. And then it brings up the question that you talked about, which was the programmer. Like, who is the programmer? This consciousness that decided to
Right.
give free will, right? I mean, to what degree is this stuff, a part of this what you call simulation, because that's a good data point.
Well, and I mean, that's some serious ass programming, if indeed that is. Now,
Right.
the thing that I can see some of the aspects in the way that, I mean, all you got to do is look at some of these amazing video games and things that people are playing, and the realism is that's going on there. But to me, the way in which, when you've, I mean, just being conscious in your carbon-based meat sack is, I mean, hell, that's just about as good as any drugs I've taken. So my point is that being sober in reality is mind-boggling by itself. Now, when you throw in, like we were just talking about, with the psychedelic and hallucinogenic properties of the natural biology that exists here, when you
it
think
reminds
about,
me of Dolly. Remember what Dolly said? He said, "I don't need drugs. I am drugs."
yeah, exactly. But you throw in the biological resonance and harmony, meaning, like you were pointing out, DMT naturally happens within our bodies and in our carbon-based biology. And it's also available in the biosphere as through other means. Ayahuasca is something that has to be combined. Where did that information come from? And why is that biological manifestation, that knowledge, so profound in what it does? So let's toss this on the table. How does the whole idea of of being biologically engineered, a la the Anunnaki in the Sumerian history, is that plausible? Does it connect with this biological harmony? Is the genetic engineering proposed in the interpretations, did that include the biosphere, the food, the herbs, the things that are needed in order to have this transformative consciousness? And one of the things that's interesting to me is, if indeed the Anunnaki and the whole Adamu and Enki and Enlil story, which again goes back to my point about here's the same thing, struggle and strife within some familial hierarchy, and one wanting to do some good stuff, the other one not wanting to do good stuff. There's that theme again, right? It's everywhere. I mean, there's that. So you have that, but what you have is something that apparently through this genetic manipulation enabled a higher level of consciousness than the original material had that was used. So the primate, the ape man, the Cro-Magnon, the Neanderthal, the something in that space was taken and modified to have consciousness. Was consciousness a part of that genetic manipulation? And if so, that fascinates the shit out of me. How does that happen? Is consciousness something that can be genetically created?
I don't know.
Do you hear what I'm saying?
No, I don't. I don't. I think that consciousness, I think that all biology has a certain level of consciousness. So I don't think that you can take consciousness away from anything. I think consciousness is a degree of complexity within awareness, right? So like there is a degree to which things are aware of themselves, right? Like a self-awareness is not exactly exclusive. It is more dynamic. It's not all or nothing. Like things are to a certain degree self-aware. I mean, we see this in dogs, we see this in dolphins, we see this in chimps, we see this in, whales, elephants, and, a lot of these higher order animals. And you could even say, I mean, there's stories of, praying mantises. I mean, they can be trained. There's things that are interesting that we see. We see these things coming out with plants communicating through mycelium. There being neural networks into the ground. So this idea of consciousness and awareness and self-awareness, I think it needs to be a little more expanded. I think we need to change what we consider, because we're only relating that to how we we're basically superimposing our own idea of it based on our own selves, but that's not true. So I don't think that consciousness is everything, but it's the degree to which. So in that story of the Anunnaki, I would say that we were evolving naturally here, or there were certain levels of advancement, the biological humans. We see this at the research of Lloyd Pye, when he talks about our chromosomes, where they only, why do we have less than apes, right? Like what's going on chromosomally? We're kind of messed up. Like we're not engineered the same. Like we actually have a lot of mistakes in our construct. There's some things that are kind of like tweaked and not in a good way. So there seems to be this natural evolution and then this augmentation that happened. And I believe that consciousness was there, but I think it got altered. And according to the story, which I'm not, bought and sold on everything, but I say that some of it got released, and then some of it got kind of controlled. And that's the question, because we do seem like we're kind of split creatures, like we're neurotic, like something's wrong, right? We don't act like other creatures. We don't act in our own self-interest, right? Like we screw shit up, like we cause our own. Not needing psychedelics, like life's a trip as it is. I mean, we really don't know. I mean, we 1/3 of our life, right, we're asleep, and when we sleep, we've talked about this extensively, where do we go? Visions, premonitions, and all kinds of things happen in our sleep. Lucid dreaming and flight, and I mean teleportation, and basically anything you can imagine can become real once you go to bed at night. And to a large degree, we are probably experiencing these things without memory in most of our nights. So it's like, what is going on? Are we living two lives? Is this a hologram? Are we in this experience for a purpose that we will only discover when we die? And is it true that this is the dream and we awaken to our real selves? And that brings just kind of a bigger thing. Like, what if we are starting to ask these questions, it means the answers are attainable, reachable, and to some degree we can somehow get to those answers, right? I mean, in nature, you can't have the question without automatically being able to have that answer somehow. And so I think that because we're already there, if creatures came and helped design us, what did they know about these cycles? What would they say about dreams? What would they say about death? How do they experience death? What kind of technologies mentally, have they achieved? And were they able to know that we would get to the level of having computation and technology and this kind of second dimension of information that we call the internet? I mean, what is all, it's interesting, because if it is true that the Anunnaki did do that, to what degree are they involved now? And then, is the simulation, like what we're experiencing today, a part of that, which is kind of mind-boggling to think about, but
well, when
it could be true.
To me, when you get into the whole idea of, cosmic cousins, if you will, going back to the point I was making earlier about there seems to be natural habits and patterns within which these frequencies manifest. There seems to be some kind of homogeneity of that, again, that shared reality that we all experience. When you bring in the whole cosmic cousins, the other entities, and we were talking about, we went from the consciousness to, the intent and the simulation. Well, then you start throwing in multiverse concepts, and you start looking at how some of those things could potentially manifest, either the way that the narrative has carved them up. I think we're up to 11 dimensions, or going back to the DMT experience, and you're having your own cosmic interdimensional experience, and having being able to conceive that idea. Because when you think about multidimensional expressions of reality, that can get pretty mind-boggling. And again, it's like you were saying, you don't need drugs, you are a drug. But I do think that, at least based on the information that we have, the histories, the mythos, again, even with the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, there seems to be a regular consistency of other entities showing up. One of the things that is fascinating to me is the number of different types of craft that have been recorded throughout history, whether it's, rock carvings, or, it's some cave paintings, or it's written in books and painted on canvas, or recorded on 8mm Polaroid, and now everybody's phone. The variety of craft that seem to be showing up, I mean, alone. And then you get into the various entities, and whether they're grays or they're angels or they're demons or they're whatever manifestation they are. There's quite a variety. But there, again, is some commonality. There seems to be a homogeneity of a humanoid form. Doesn't matter if it's grays or whatever, except for some of the Chimera stuff. But there seems to be consistency with a head, torso, arms, legs, and some of them are scaly, look like reptiles. Some of them are Nordic and look like gods and goddesses. But they seem to have that common characteristic. So you have a variety of craft with a bunch of different types of entities, consistent for each one, for the most part, indicating some kind of regularity, some data trend that you can look at and go, well, apparently there's consistency with the way that these things have manifested in the way that people have recorded them. So I personally think
Well,
the whole the
go
whole
ahead. Yeah.
the whole idea of the Anunnaki being a significant um, influencer and progenitor of our current manifestation as humans seems to be the closest, because one of the other things that, again, doing some interdisciplinary connections, you were talking earlier about, war on Mars. Let's toss the asteroid belt in there. Let's talk about the mythos that actually in the Sumerian and Anunnaki stories explains all that. Explains what happened on Mars, explains the asteroid belt, explains us. You kind of go, well, all right. What is, I mean, when you connect those dots, you kind of go, looks interesting. What do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you it jumps really fast when you make the decision. Like, well, to me, like when I was younger, I said, look, all it takes is one, right? All it takes is one UFO to be real. So it doesn't, all those videos, I used to get into all that, the Jamie Musan, all the conferences where they would just show all these in Mexico. They had just flights of all of these UFOs. And it's so real. And I thought to myself, like, God, this is just insane. Then you go to the crop circles. If you really look into that stuff, it's just unbelievable. And if there's just no, if all of this stuff was fake, it's the most brilliant, amazing, epic thing that's ever been done. I told myself that all you basically have to say is that it just takes one of them to be real, because it just one of those things is real, then it's real. So it's a quick jump, right? And there's just no way that all of them are fake, because it's just there's too much and it's too amazing, and there's just no way that it could be coordinated and to that such a degree. And there's a lot of really, really amazing evidence. But once you make that jump, it then follows you into another quick jump, which is, well, then they've been here a long time. Because if they're here, then they've always been here, right? There is no, oh, well, they just got here. Like,
Yeah.
In 1947, yep, they just showed up, like, whoops, because that's ridiculous, right? So to me, I think that it's a really quick thing that happens when you go, it just takes one. How plausible is that? Pretty plausible. They've been here. And then you have that system that falls in place.
And to me, I find this whole, and I've seen it for the last couple of decades. Even before that, it's when it started getting more awareness and traction in the 80s. But this whole discourse about disclosure's been around for millennia. It's always been there. What's interesting to me, again, going back to some of the metrics and the way that, like I was saying, there's all kinds of different craft: cigar shape, disc shape, glowing lights. I mean, some of it's ours, but when you look at the history and the paintings and the descriptions, commonalities there. You have disc shape, you have cigar shape, you have all kinds of people flying around in little bubbles and craft and vimanas, and you go, there's the consistency is a part of the pattern. And that's one of the things that, again, going back to one of the other streams and nuggets we were tossing around earlier about, elevating the thought process, thinking better about how, thinking better so that you end up with better thoughts. And that is just being able to stop and think about what is the data. And you look around and you go, well, there is obviously more than just us. The way in which that we have defined our reality has been carefully crafted and curated for a long time. The real truth and knowledge of energy and consciousness and the way that, again, what I'm calling frequency physics, because I think that's where everything should be, because that's what everything is. Everything is a frequency. And, Walter Russell, Tesla, number of Royal Rife. I mean, these guys, Schauberger, they understood this ether, this existence of frequencies, and they each defined it in their own different way. But what we are about to see in changing the paradigm of the way that we think about the way reality is going to blow people's minds. The individuality of being able to conceive it and then be a part of its manifestation in the way that you experience it is going to blow people's minds. And that is one of the, I think, most important things that's coming out of this, is that those who stop and pause and think about it and look at the change in the reality that is happening, whether you like it or not, you can either go with the flow or the flow is going to make you go, are going to be able to realize and experience something that is going to be that cosmic change. And there's a whole bunch of different components at play. And if you are at least aware that stuff's happening, whether, in that realm and on that level and in that space of reality, then you'll be able to get through the other side with as much positive result as you can. But it's going to be profound. I mean, it's going to blow people's minds. And consciousness and being able to think through these things is front and center from my perspective.
I mean, look at what's already happening. I mean, like the people that are listening to this right now, and look what they're watching. Like we're on a screen, like a virtual screen. You're literally in space with the Earth in HD, spinning behind you, right? I mean, you look like you're literally on the International Space Station or something.
I actually am. I got a ride earlier this afternoon.
It's pretty quiet up there, huh? Not a lot of wind, it doesn't seem. Robert, your hair looks great.
Well, I tell you what, I got a great view.
Look at the reality of what we're doing, and this would blow the mind of anybody 100 years ago. And that's like, my grandpa is 88 years old, right? So like, I hung out with him yesterday. Within one human lifetime, this is a complete different reality, and we're in it. And it's hard to see the forest through the trees, but I don't think we're really gonna. I mean, we're on a ride, and I don't think we can truly actually understand how rapid it is because we're involved in it. I mean, you said you're a geezer geek. I mean, when you were a kid, would you ever even imagine this situation happening? No. And what we're doing right now, you couldn't have imagined it. There was nothing you could have done in your imagination that would have been able to bring you to this.
The only thing I'll say is that, I saw the night that Star Trek premiered, I watched it on a black and white TV. And when I saw the screens and communication and all that. Um, I I said, now I can have some of that. Now Jetsons was another one, right? So and there
Yeah,
was
that was Jetsons. You're right. Was a
I lose you.
here you go, Robert.
Nice.
Jetsons was one that was you're right. It did something to our consciousness. We actually saw that reality coming. Like I think that when you watch the Jetsons, you go, "Yeah, that's going to happen. That's going to happen."
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you think about it, and then
And
see, I remember in the '60s, um, there was the airline Pan Am, and they had, and TWA was back then too, but Pan Am had this um, space plane model that was just badass. And I had that. I had the Saturn V. I had the lunar module from the moon landings. My mom worked at, back then it was McDonnell Douglas. And I'm not sure what division she was in, but right after I turned 12 on July 15th of 69, and it was like 4 days later, they landed on the moon. So my mom, working at one of the space contractors, got me these 2 by 3 foot full color photo prints of Armstrong and Aldrin coming off the limb. And I had the, I mean, they were awesome. Just, bright color, and had my Saturn V rocket, my lunar module. I was just totally into that.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I've actually dreamed about being a kid, basically your generation because it's weird. I grew up going, wow, I heard about all this space flight. We landed on the moon and there was such a drive to, that's when you said Star Trek came out and I mean even all the old
66, I think.
old time movies, Planet, what was it? Some of the really original ones that you really had this huge future vision of being on other planets back in the 50s and 60s, and it just died like 80s 90s. Like what happened? Like it all just it seemed like there was more of a, oh my god, we're going to get there at that point than there was in the 80s. We kind of like lost that vision of being in space, it seemed. And it's strange because here we have now this new push, right? We have this Elon Musk angle. We have the Space Force happening. I when I heard the Space Force, and people laughed, and I said, "Well, this to me is disclosure. This is a disclosure saying, hey, guess what? We already have a Space Force. You're just getting to you're now aware that it's a potential, but you're going to find out. Oh yeah, hey, by the way, um, we're advanced. We've been up there, and we've been up there for decades."
Yeah, and when you get into some of the more fascinating storylines, are you familiar with Andrew Basiago?
No, I'm not.
So he's currently I guess he's a lawyer up in Washington State somewhere, and he has this phenomenal story. I think it's Project Pegasus, I believe, and he incredibly credible, very detailed, extremely well told story of being a time traveler in his youth. And he was a traveler, a participant in this thing called Project Pegasus. So he and his dad worked in this secret program that was able to transport them to different places in different times. I mean, you listen to the story, listen to him tell it, and you're like, damn, I think you were there.
Yeah.
And I believe
Yeah.
that you believe what you're saying, right? And it's very credible. He talks about, excuse me, some of the science and the ways in which it worked. You have the chronovisor, which is a part of that project, which apparently enables one to dial in to the time and place. I find that, just from a physical technology perspective, being able to, again, conceive this idea of multiple dimensions, multiple different universes, the interconnectivity, the ways in which one can move between these dimensions. To me, the whole idea of a non-local consciousness, being able to go any place in time and space with your mind or this consciousness, is where the whole idea of how does it work come to for me. Seeing, hearing, and reading, and I think that's what we see in psychics and magicians and people who are able to focus the conscious energy that we all have. And again, from a psychic perspective, that's an inherent component we were talking about earlier, about the commonality of consciousness. It's everywhere. And a part of that consciousness is this, maybe it's the consciousness connection that we're in this psychic, what we call psychic abilities and psychic manifestations come from. Start looking at things like the Akashic record and so forth. Again, going back to our conversation regarding hallucinogens, psychedelics, DMT, etc. When you see somebody execute a protocol of process and do this thing called remote viewing or controlled or coordinate remote viewing or associative or enhanced, anything where there is an intent and a target that is given, that apparently the subconscious is able to connect to, and then the conscious component has this experience wherein information is experienced, brought back, and then corroborated. That whole thing, to me, makes the consciousness conversation just wide open. It's like, how much of that is will? How much of that is intent? How much of that is program simulation? How much of the Akashic record is simply the program database?
Well, I mean, it's all information, right? Like, so every single experience and thought and occurrence, right? Everything that happens creates an imprint within the fabric, right? So the fabric of the universe is encoded by the activity of the substance within the fabric. So anything that's resting within the universe, everything that comes, it's within existence. Everything it does is somehow logged, right? It's like it's imprinted, and there's like a coordinate point of that experience in every moment. So for example, if you were to take like the idea of time travel, so so we know that like every moment you and I, like as I'm talking right now, as we're having this conversation. So at the very beginning of this conversation, if you want to think of it in physical sense, it's, millions of miles away, because the earth is flying through space, right? And it's moving through the universe. And so when we started this conversation, it was thousands upon thousands of miles behind us somewhere at a certain point in time and space, and it's continuously happening. And there's a coordinates point to that exact moment, to that exact uh, thing, right? So what happens is, when you want to time travel, it's not that you're actually traveling. What you're doing is you're superimposing that coordinates point onto your present coordinates point, and you cease to exist where you are, and you immediately exist where that coordinates point would be. And that would be the idea of like Star Trek teleportation, where they're essentially using mathematics of the universe to find that coordinates point and then superimpose it upon you to a degree that you just cease to exist